Well, today, the 20 remaining living hostages were released by Hamas. The hostages spent more than 2 years in captivity in Gaza. And the release comes after President Trump and other world leaders signed a Gaza ceasefire agreement. For more perspective on this issue, we welcome Evelyn Farkas, the executive director of the McCain Institute. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Rick.
Let's start off by talking about how did this one happen? I mean, why is it after all these attempts to pull off a ceasefire, to pull off some peace, we finally had it happen now?
Well, I think President Trump finally decided to use all of the United States collective power, our economic, military, diplomatic power, and turn it into influence. And how did he do that? He basically told Prime Minister Netanyahu that it was unacceptable that he bombed the safe area, the safe haven that the Hamas leadership has in Doha. He was so angry at that he told Netanyahu he had reached the end of his road and he had to accept a ceasefire and make a deal. So President Trump essentially said, I mean it this time.
And I guess I go back to the point of, okay, there had been several other times when he said, I mean this, but this one stuck. Why?
Well, a couple other reasons. I think that Hamas was sufficiently weakened. The Gulf states clearly did think that President Trump meant it this time, that really they could also put pressure on Hamas. They probably started worrying about what Israel might do in the future. Israel had to give a guarantee that they wouldn't strike again in Qatar, but clearly the Gulf states were worried about the conflict spinning out of control. So you had the Gulf states putting pressure on Hamas and President Trump putting pressure on Netanyahu, and you have then at least the making of a ceasefire. We'll see if all this pressure can be sustained and whether we can get to an ultimate peace agreement.
So what are the next steps that have to happen in this?
Well, you saw there was a big meeting today, and I think that was an achievement also sort of in and of itself, just President Trump getting together in Egypt with all of these heads of states, essentially putting their faces and their signatures on a commitment to bring peace to the Middle East, to bring security to Israel and the Israeli people, and also to the Palestinian people. It was, of course, restricted in that circumstance, mostly to Gaza, though they talked about a future for the Middle East. But there are a lot of steps, Rick, that are required. I mean, first of all, to keep the ceasefire, the Israelis have to continue to move backwards, so to give back territory. There's a question of who are they giving the territory back to, because there's supposed to be an interim international security force that doesn't exist yet. At the same time, Hamas is supposed to lay down their arms. What's the process for that? And Hamas actually hasn't committed verbally or in writing to doing that. Those are two huge sticking points, leaving aside the fact that you don't see a natural Palestinian political leadership emerging. In fact, the leader who's most likely to have the greatest legitimacy with the Palestinian people and probably also internationally remains imprisoned in jail. Israel did not let him out. So, I could keep going, but there are a lot of pieces that need to be negotiated. There's also the money for reconstruction.
There was some discussion of the fact that there were a couple of significant Arab leaders from foreign countries in that region who were not present at the signing today. Are we supposed to read something significant into that?
Yes. I mean, first of all, Netanyahu himself was supposed to be there at one point. It sounds like, based on the media reporting, that some of the Arab leaders said, we're not coming. So Iraq in particular, if Netanyahu comes. They did not have the Palestinian leadership there, to my knowledge. It is premature to have them there, though. I don't think that that's such a horrible thing, because at the end of the day, for both the Palestinians and for the Israelis, they need to have a real concrete agreement in place in order to sign something. So I think it wasn't bad for them to stay away. It sort of felt to me like what we called in the 90s when we were trying to end the Balkan Wars, the contact group. All the other countries that have a stake in the peace and in the war ending, but not the actual combatants.
We have seen peace deals before in the Middle East that are trumpeted very loudly, people win Nobel Prizes over them, and then they fall apart. How likely is this one to go down that path, or does this have a greater sticking power potentially?
I mean, I think the jury's out. It's probably 50-50 right now. This right now is a ceasefire. It's not a peace agreement, even though President Trump, through the force of his words and his will, is trying to his credit, make it a peace agreement, and it may well end up that way. I think if President Trump continues to exert pressure on Israel, if the Arab states continue to exert pressure on Hamas, if President Trump's team is committed and works on the details, and they do all this relatively quickly, right now, while Hamas is weak, and frankly, while Iran is weak, then we could see a real durable peace agreement. But they have to move fast, and they have to continue to keep the pressure on.
You mentioned rebuilding. Let's talk about the rebuilding process. I mean, it's going to be very complicated in so many ways, not the least of which is going to be very expensive. I mean, what's being put in place, or what could be put in place to make that work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that they need to put, one nation probably in charge of the reconstruction, and have multiple countries or some kind of entity, some kind of international entity, and then have countries step up and say, I pledge X amount of money. All those leaders that were standing there, first and foremost, of course, the Gulf states, need to put in some money. They, frankly, have not done a good job taking care of the Palestinian people, all these decades, and the Palestinian people deserve the international community, especially their Arab neighbors, to step up and pay for the reconstruction. It will be expensive. And of course, it's only a first step, because the next question is what happens to the fate of the Palestinians outside of Gaza? What happens to the two-state solution? And ultimately, can we establish a Palestinian state side by side next to the state of Israel?
And from the Israeli perspective, I mean, so often what has happened is you have rogue groups within the Palestinian world that takes action against the Israelis. Will the Israelis have enough faith that there won't be these elements that will try to make a statement, try to make a stand?
Yeah, I mean, they'll have to, verify everything in terms of the disarmament. And of course, they'll have to continue their intelligence activities. And if there's a threat, they'll have to work with whoever the security entity is in Gaza to make sure they eliminate the threat. But Israel won't have the free hand it has right now in Gaza under the future, under any future agreement.
I guess the good news is we're here, right? We've achieved this point. The question is, where are we going to end up a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? Evelyn Farkas from the McCain Institute, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Rick.